Financial Argument. Follow us on YouTube.
This next question is from Shervin, and they're wondering, please elaborate as much as you can as to how the Saudis are demanding silver bullion for payment.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of details. What I received was in my Contact Us, a message from a fellow and said, I can't give you my name, I can't give you my organization within the U.S. Navy, but I want you to know that it's kind of hush-hush, but the U.S. Navy is struggling in the Persian Gulf, or the Gulf region as I like to call it now, in paying for diesel for their ships. And we're not talking so much about aircraft carriers. Those tend, not always, but tend to be nuclear powered. We're talking about the frigates and the destroyers, the escorts to the aircraft carriers. It appears, okay, this fellow said, when they pull into port, the Arab nations are demanding silver payment. Okay, I haven't seen this confirmed elsewhere except in other, vague references, one or two. Sometimes, Elijah, you just don't get the kind of confirmation you want. So what I prefer to do is, rather than sit on the story and say, well, I'm going to wait for this to be confirmed the next few months, if it tends to be confirmed, I'm going to mention it as a possible story. I'm going to mention it as in need of being confirmed. And I'm going to mention it as fitting the whole picture. So that's all I have to say on it. I've probably gotten about 20 questions in the last, 2 or 3 weeks. Do you have more to say on that? And I tell them this same answer. It was from someone in either, I can't remember, I think he said, I'm in the U.S. Navy, or my best friend is in the U.S. Navy. I can't remember. I should remember. I just don't remember. It was someone with a direct contact in the U.S. Navy in the Persian Gulf.
All right. Well, this next viewer wants to know, what is the possibility of implementing a digital world currency instead of a gold standard?
Well, this is your cryptocurrency Bitcoin question. What's the possibility? Nothing, zero, nil, zippo. Digital currency? Gosh, that's as stupid as the negative interest rates in banks. It's a last gasp guffaw. Are you kidding me? A digital currency? I haven't heard something as stupid as that being embraced widely in a long, long time. I don't care if Sweden is well along. Sweden is your hidden extension to Nazi Switzerland. I had a very interesting comment given to me from a client from Sweden. This was about 2 months ago, and he said, Jim, I have some news for you. Sweden was not neutral in World War II. They were declared neutral. They were very pro-Nazi, but they fooled the United States and England and Western Europe, the alliance. They fooled Eisenhower and all those people into thinking that they were neutral when they were working behind the scenes, supporting the German Nazis, supporting with loans to the industries and factories that were making, aircraft and V-1, V-2 missiles and a lot of things, tanks and ships, submarines. The Swedes were very much involved in that. So I don't care that Sweden is well along in digital currency. I point to the huge cash market out there. It's a lot more than just hot dog vendors. It's bribery to politicians. They're not going to want that to be done with digital cash, are they? That's easily traced. There's always going to be drugs in our human society because people are weak. And, that included me when I was age 19. People were weak, they were susceptible, and sometimes they were just so depressed they wanted something to change their emotional makeup. Drugs are going to be paid for, but not in digital currency. gambling is done, like in Vegas and Atlantic City, they might take digital currency, but I doubt it, because there are a lot of people out there who gamble and don't want their wives or husbands to know about it. So Atlantic City and Vegas are not going to they're not going to get in their way if they want to use cash. Okay, there's a lot of fencing. I'm looking at notes because I've been here before. There's a lot of fencing of stolen goods. They're not going to want digital currency to be used to pass on the stolen goods. There's prostitution. They're not going to want digital currency to pay for prostitution. The entire black market, smuggling, cross borders. I have a person I know who's involved with some smuggling of Nicaraguan jewelry. They put it in lower elements of trucks and whatever, cross the border, doesn't get caught. Okay, it's paid for, not in digital currency. So digital currency could come about if there's no crime in the world. And how stupid is that? That's all I have to say. Hope I'm clear. It's an enormously stupid concept that's gained traction.
Now back to gold and silver. This viewer is wanting to know, what do you think about the possible confiscation of gold and silver in the United States? And if you see that as a possibility, what do you think of offshore storage, especially in the Cayman Islands?
I don't think there's going to be any confiscation of gold and silver. What they might try to do is confiscate the gold mines. In fact, there's a big project right now by the cabal to take control of one of the largest, if not the largest, gold mine in the world. It's called Grasberg, and it's in Indonesia. It's a big battleground right now because the white dragons of China and Asia want to take control of it. And the Indonesian government is in the process of selling it in kind of an open auction. And the Chinese have made the best offer. I don't have all the facts lined up there, but my point is the battlegrounds are for the gold properties. I don't think they're going to confiscate your stocks because that's paper wealth. They can just declare that as worthless. They don't need to confiscate it. I think a lot of paper wealth is going to turn worthless, and that includes mining stocks. But they're not going to confiscate your gold and silver coins from door to door, or say that you got to show up at certain designated banks and get redeemed for it. They're not going to do that because they're dead set in avoiding the increase of publicity for its value. So what they're going to do is continue to work in the shadows, continue to work in the propaganda, continue to work in, say, acquisition of gold mines, continue to extend Barrick's property. Why wasn't Barrick liquidated? They're broke. They're done. In fact, they were struggled with an illiquidity problem. Why do they continue? Because the powers that be, the elite, just funded it probably with some narco money, found a way to do the laundering, again, not with digital currency, that completely stupid concept that's gaining traction. If they declared, if Washington and Ottawa and many Western European capitals, including London, declared that they were going to do a confiscation of gold, there would be a rebellion. They would learn how many Americans managed to keep their guns and managed to find ammunition. There would be war in the streets, I think. And at the same time, the rest of the world would say, look what those Western stupid-ass governments are doing. I think we need to increase the gold price and smash their COMEX and LBMA corrupt arenas. I think it would light a fuse, Elijah, and bring about a doubling of the gold price and a lot of confusion and chaos in the streets with government agents getting shot.
This viewer is wanting to know, Is there any further good insider info from either The Voice or others about what's now going on behind the scenes with Deutsche Bank?
I was told 3 years ago that Deutsche Bank would be the victim of a breakup, and they would try to rescue at least one or two of their viable business units, segments. And The Voice told me about 3 months ago, 4 months ago, maybe around January, Deutsche Bank doesn't have any viable business segments. Okay, there was an analyst. I'm giving a background, but then I'll try to answer the question a little more. There was an analyst who did a fine summary of Deutsche Bank's true value, and that it goes negative. And he came up using conservative rules and guidelines, in other words, giving Deutsche Bank the benefit of the doubt on some of their toxic and crappy paper, debt paper, worthless assets. And he came up with a figure of minus 400 billion for Deutsche Bank's value. Now, that's pretty hefty. You can't have a secondary stock issuance and get that bailed out with new and fresh capital. It doesn't happen. You might do it for 5 or 8 or 10 billion or maybe 20 billion, but not for 400 billion. All right, so you do have the opportunity of asking the Euro Central Bank coming in there and just issuing a few $100 billion of free money. No, not going to happen. Okay, so the same analyst said, I did an analysis of Lehman Brothers' true value back in 2007, and when the dust cleared, I was able to check some of my rules, and I found that I was off by about 2.5 to 1, 2 or 3 to 1. Lehman Brothers was in the red, double or triple what I stated, and I used the same rules for Deutsche Bank, so it's pretty clear that Deutsche Bank is worth minus 1 trillion, give or take. All right, so that's the argument that Deutsche Bank cannot come back. And I think Deutsche Bank has been broken partly under Chinese pressure. The Chinese might have said, we can't really control the Wall Street banks. They're too much under the U.S. banker cabal and Federal Reserve shadow and control. But harken back to 1998 when Wall Street shipped off Bankers Trust to Deutsche Bank and forced them to do an acquisition. That was so that the U.S. banking regulatory bodies, the regulators, would not have purview over Bankers Trust. Instead, it would be European. In fact, it was so much of both types that even the European regulators just left it alone. In other words, it became kind of an island body of toxic derivative junk. The reason I mention the Bankers Trust is I believe China made a conclusion that they can attack the Western banking system with a crowbar and open up all of its insolvency for all to see by going after Deutsche Bank. I actually think that eventually they're going to try to revive Deutsche Bank in some new form after a more complete liquidation, if that's ever going to happen, and make Deutsche Bank a member of the Shanghai Gold Fix. They need a nice German element for their gold fix to go alongside the RMB center, the trading center that they have set up already in Frankfurt, Germany. Okay, so what is the vulnerability? I believe the vulnerability is quite simple. It's pigs nation, Southern European sovereign debt, Southern European private sector bank debt, and the derivatives. Okay, so it would be countries' debt like Italy's and Portuguese sovereign debt. it just might start getting out of control. And believe me, Draghi at the Euro Central Bank is on the job trying to make sure that enough money can be printed to cover Portugal and Italy. But he's realizing that Italy is just too big. They've got $1 trillion worth of debt that they cannot handle. They did something dumb. It was a patch. Well, it wasn't dumb as much as trivial. Italy made what was called Atlas. It was a bad bank concept, and they funded it with $5 billion. And some of the smarter analysts said, "Oh, what are they going to do after that week is over and it's exhausted?" Well, that's pretty much what happened. In 10 to 20 days, it was exhausted, and the Euro Central Bank is back on the scene, coming up with their silly rules about liquidating this and what they call austerity of the Italian government budget. It's funny, these nations that want austerity don't have austerity in their own home country, namely the United States. Remember the austerity became a topic in 2013 for the U.S. government, and then suddenly the debt ceiling was just suspended, and it just goes up another $1 trillion a year without any controls. Okay, so the Deutsche Bank threat is to the Italian banking system and little Portugal as well. The Deutsche Bank threat is for, say, the interest rate swap derivatives and other banking derivatives that are holding things together. What holds the dollar together? Primarily, it's the Treasury bond market. And Deutsche Bank has the potential of doing a pretty good wrecking job on the U.S. Treasury bond market. May have already started. You're not going to get widespread reports about how Deutsche Bank has caused some liquidity damage and major cracks in the U.S. Treasury bond market because they're working hard to prevent them, and they're working hard to make sure that no story goes out about the lack of integrity for the Treasury bond. The Treasury bond is the Achilles heel for the dollar right now.
All right, well, moving on here. This viewer wants to know, why doesn't Russia encourage its citizens to buy gold and silver? In China, they are advertising and facilitating the accumulation of gold and silver among its population. Had Russia done this when China started some years ago, then many would have survived the attack in the ruble in far better shape. So did you want to discuss a little bit about this?
Well, how do you know that the Russian companies and Russian citizens have not protected themselves with gold and silver? I mean, why is there an assumption that they have not? They don't believe in Western debt paper as being money. They don't believe as mortgage bonds in the West for real estate. They don't believe in Russia or China that such bonds are really good income-bearing securities. How do you know? Russia has at least 25 to 30,000 tons of gold in the Kremlin vaults. Remember that Tom Cruise Impossible Mission Impossible movie? It was about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, where he changed his jacket to make it inside out and was running away from the Kremlin and things started blowing up. That was supposedly his break-in for the Russian vaults under the Kremlin. Okay, they have a massive network of gold vaults down there under the Kremlin. Okay, here's my major point though on this question. If their government has 25 to 30,000 tons of gold, then it speaks to a dedication for their nation on hard assets for savings, not Western debt paper that earns a yield. Crappy, toxic paper that fool people into thinking they're wealthy, that fool people into buying them because they can get some interest off them. No, the Russians believe as a society in gold and silver. And it will be quite apparent when they issue a gold-backed ruble. So I don't buy the assumption that Russian companies and Russian individuals and households have no gold and silver. I don't buy it for a minute. Just like India has a devotion toward gold, their devotion might be a little bit more deep than Russia's, but I think Russia has plenty. We think there's another assumption built in this question, that there's been a tremendous amount of damage to the Russian economy. Maybe a minor amount of damage. Are people aware that Gazprom had a record-setting profit year? So where's the damage? The damage comes from the Western propaganda press talking about something they know very little about, namely the Russian economy. Russia's doing fine. Russia is bouncing back from these sanctions, finding second buyers for their food supplies, finding different ways to continue with pipeline construction. Meanwhile, the real damage is to the U.S. economy, which I believe is suffering 5 times worse than Russia. We're stuck in a -5 to -4% recession every single year for 7 consecutive years since Lehman. The United States economy is now suffering from an energy sector implosion that Russia is not suffering from. The energy sector implosion in the U.S. is capable of taking down the entire U.S. banking system. Not happening in Russia. Russia is working closely with Arab nations now to reset a currency-based system for pricing of oil that's not related to the dollar. The U.S. is reeling from a dismantling of the petrodollar derivatives that are in the multiple trillions. So the assumptions of the question, I think, are just way off. Russia is nowhere near as damaged as the United States, and Russian citizens and corporations are far more dedicated to gold and silver ownership than we know. And we're not going to be learning it from our Western press reports.
All right, now moving to this next viewer's question. This viewer wants to know, do you honestly believe that the U.S. empire, with all its power and influence, is going to just simply roll over and allow gold and silver to undermine the foundation on which it stands?
No, it's not going to roll over. It's going to collapse on its own debt. Very, very simply stated. We're relying on QE and hyper-monetary inflation of unsterilized type to support the U.S. government debt to the tune of $1 trillion a year. We're relying on printing of treasuries and payments of treasury bills for foreign imports that are now encountering obstacles. We're undermining all foreign banking core systems for their reserves, which are dominant U.S. treasuries, by printing them Zimbabwe style. We have energy sector, multiple billions in damages and impaired debt that banks are holding, in particular Wells Fargo, maybe Citibank as well. We're not going to roll over and let gold and silver take over. We're going to implode like we have been since Lehman. Lehman was the first stage of the implosion. QE was the guarantee of the rest of the implosion. This is a debt saturation and implosion issue. We don't just say, oh, we're going to let gold and silver take over. No, we're going to implode and watch helplessly as gold and silver move in. And if you think the U.S. military has all this power, you're dead wrong. Why they get out of the Persian Gulf a year and a half ago. Why they vacate, in certain respects, Syria. What happened with the USS Donald Cook in the Black Sea, April 2014? There have been other incidents that are not as well reported as the Donald Cook. There was an enormous incident in near Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, where the Chinese fried a U.S. naval destroyer. had to be taken back as junk. There was another incident in 2015 where the Chinese fried an entire aircraft carrier. By fry, I mean use advanced weapons. You know, it's kind of like the next generation up from the electromagnetic pulse, the EMPs. Now, there is no grand U.S. military superiority anymore. Anyone who thinks that is living in the past. The demonstrations have been all over the place. The first big shocking demonstration happened in around 1998 when the Sunburn missile of Russia was given a demo to show its extreme superiority over the U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile. In fact, Russia did not violate certain NATO treaties when they launched, I think from the Caspian Sea, 2,000 miles away from Syria, they launched some, I think they're called SU missiles. I don't have all the naming details, but there's a missile that I think is the generation beyond Sunburn. So they did not violate, and they had very strong accuracy, not pinpoint, but you know, a cruise missile will come anywhere from 30 to 50 meters and yards away from a target if several hundred miles away. But the Sunburn is more like, you know, 5 or 10 or 6 or 2 meters away from its target. Very extreme. Okay, that was a wake-up call to the U.S. Pentagon that they no longer had complete dominance in weaponry. And the incidents since the Ukraine war have demonstrated that the U.S. military doesn't really have dominance in anything anymore.
All right, well, moving to this next question from Scott Harris. He asks, what will happen to the U.S. dollar held internationally, especially in Ecuador, Panama, and Costa Rica, when the Scheich dollar is implemented?
Okay, again, this has to do with certain elite meetings that are taking place, and we as mere unwashed mortals who, don't have the ability for someone to take care of all our needs like the elite do. I mean, like cook our meals and give us a bath. We mere unwashed mortals have to pick up information as we can. What I'm picking up is that there's going to be a point in time, and we may be approaching it right now. We may have already hit it, because I believe a lot of the shipping strikes are over the refusal to take Treasury bills as payments. We're going to reach a point where the United States can no longer rely on the global reserve currency and its printing to cover its debts and to cover its bills for imports. When that day comes, and the domestic-only dollar, I call it the Scheich dollar because Scheich is German for refuse, garbage, and shit, excrement. When the Scheich dollar is launched, it will be true Scheich if we don't have a gold backing on it. And I expect that the U.S. elites will make all the wrong decisions in order to retain power. By the wrong decision, I mean they're going to say, we've got a gold backing. It's deep storage gold, and it's been in our U.S. government accounting for over 30 years. It's Fort Knox and its extensions, and that's pure fraud. Now, if there is a global movement toward gold-backed currencies, and I think there will be, starting with the Chinese yuan, RMB, moving on to the Russian ruble, moving on to the new German Deutschmark, aka Nordic euro, and a whole lot more, including the Mexican silver peso. If there is a movement like that, there's going to be an international auditing body that the U.S. does not control. In other words, the U.S. fraud cannot continue to extend. And the new dollar, if it's fraudulent, the Scheich dollar, if it does not have a proper backing, it will be devalued. And devalued, I think, on a regular basis, 30%, then 30%, which will preserve half its value. By that I mean 70% retained, and then again 70% retained, which means 49% retained in the two steps. So the international dollar would come about from foreigners owning dollars outside the U.S. Now, inside the U.S., they're going to be subjected to rules conversion, just like Europe was subjected to around 1999. Turn in your Italian lira, turn in your Deutschmark, turn in your French francs, get these new euros. And I found it fascinating that the Swiss did not participate. Why? Because that's a Nazi center. They don't want to be part of the European Union, all the lunatic stuff going on that we're seeing right now. Don't expect Switzerland to take in Arab refugee garbage. Not going to happen. Okay, so what will the international dollar have for rules and regulations? My indication, what I'm hearing from a couple of contacts, and it's very difficult to get firm, reliable information that you can confirm with other parties and match and mix and say, oh yeah, this is all saying the same thing. You can't do that. And not in today's world, not with all the hidden deals and corruption from the elites. But what I believe might happen, this is what one very connected source said, that when the new Scheich dollar comes to be, apart from all the issues of its legitimacy, the internationally held dollars, like in Singapore and Panama and Switzerland, they will have a period of time like 6 to 18 months to convert out of the dollar into one of the newer legitimate currencies that have been launched. So you can't say you've got to move out immediately because we don't have yet on the table these international global gold-backed currencies like RMB, ruble, Swiss franc, Deutschmark, even the Mexican silver peso. I'm really looking forward to seeing the Mexican silver peso because that's kind of close to home. the little oddball nation in this group is Panama. Now, Panama owns around 250 tons of gold. Now, if you think that's a minor, insignificant amount, you're dead wrong. They have 3 million population, roughly, and the U.S. has 300. So 100 times 250 tons is 25,000 tons when you compare per capita to the U.S. when Fort Knox had around 8,500. So you're talking about triple Fort Knox that Panama owns now in gold. They also own 86 million pounds of copper plates. They're actually talking, especially before Chavez was murdered. I'm sorry, Chavez died in Venezuela. They were talking about a Central American dollar backed by gold and copper. And now I think they're in negotiations with China to do a formal contract swap of copper for gold. And China will have some access to the Panama copper, which is very valuable for industrial applications. Okay, I actually believe it is possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Depends on how many people the U.S. government murders in Panama, which is what the exceptional nation does. When they say exceptional, it's not exceptionally good. It's exceptionally corrupt, like a mafia. By the way, just for a little side information, the U.S. during the 1983 or 84 rebellion with Noriega, when the U.S. came in and made sure that the dollar would continue in its usage in Panama banks, the U.S. government used their laser weapons and left 200 Panama soldiers as puddles on the streets. So all Panama knows about U.S. laser weapons used against not just soldiers, some civilians as well. All right, I actually believe it's possible that Panama could serve as the gold central bank for Latin America if they get some other contributions, like from Chile and Argentina and Brazil and Ecuador. Don't know about Colombia and Venezuela. Venezuela is going to have a lot of trouble just keeping the lights on and feeding at the dinner tables. This is what currency crisis does. And if U.S. gets a currency crisis, look no further than Venezuela for what could happen. I believe it's possible Panama will offer a currency gold-backed with details of copper for gold swapping in the background for usage across Latin America. That's the international dollar. And I should mention that I believe the BRICS New Development Bank is going to turn out to be a processing center for treasury bonds that get converted into gold. And the New Development Bank for the BRICS is basically going to be a gold central bank that issues gold trade notes for satisfying trade payments. So I got off the course a little bit, but I believe international held dollars will have a period of time where they must be converted to some other more legitimate alternative that appears soon.
Mark from Hawaii is wanting to know, given that banks can engineer the price of gold at all, why should they not also do the same for the pricing of oil, given their exposure and the consequences to their existence if the price continues to spiral downward?
Well, there's a simple explanation, but unfortunately involves a complicated vehicle. When the Saudis parted ways with the United States in 2014, we started to see a degradation and a dismantling of the financial derivatives known as the petrodollar contracts. These are vast contracts in the trillions that link crude oil, I think, basically to the IMF basket of currencies, but in particular linking crude oil to the dollar. I think there are others that link crude oil to the euro, the yen, and the British pound, the yen from Japan. Okay, so when the divorce began between Washington and Saudi Arabia 2 years ago, a lot of dismantling and liquidation took place of giant contracts having to do with linking basically the dollar with crude oil. So when this questioner is wondering why don't they use a device to maintain maintain the oil price, they had that for 40 years. It's being dismantled. They can't use something that's being dismantled with trillion-dollar volumes right now. So what he wants to happen now is being dismantled that held things together for over 30 years. It's going away. You can't use it. It's being dismantled. It's like saying, well, we've got a second car in the garage. Why don't we use it? Well, you can't, because the whole neighborhood's been taking it for its parts. It's being dismantled. These are giant contracts, like, say, a French bank, and they must redeem with, say, well, in this month they must redeem with $180 billion worth of petrodollar derivatives, where this French bank was serving as a focal point in the region. So that produces your artificial dollar demand. They needed a lot of dollars. They needed the dollar swap facility to be used in a very big way. And that is what lifted the dollar. I actually have a point, Elijah. If oil was the de facto standard, the hard asset backing the dollar since 1973, one can make the argument that the dollar is dying by virtue of the fact that the crude oil price went down 75%. Don't look at the dollar index, because that is an index that has 52% weighted representation in the euro. Don't look at the collection of broken paper currencies to make the claim that the dollar is strong. That's an inane, dumb argument. No, the dollar is weak because crude oil has gone down. Crude oil was its foundation.
Marco Vargas from Portugal asks, I would like to know more about the bankruptcy of Espírito Santo Bank and Funchal International Bank in Portugal, as well as the purchase of Funchal International Bank by Santander Toda in detriment of Caixa Geral de Depósitos. Do you know about that?
I remember Espírito Santo Bank, BES, was in the news a lot back in 2014. What we've seen regarding the Portuguese banks is a lot of bailouts, and some of them rather hidden, by Draghi and the Euro Central Bank. I really don't have a lot more information except that it doesn't take much for Draghi and the Euro Central Bank to fix these small Portuguese banks. Their main concern at the Euro Central Bank is Italy. And I know this fellow is from Portugal, but Portugal is not a huge country. I think they have 11 million people. They're the size of Greece. And interestingly, they don't get the attention of Greece. And this is kind of a sidebar issue, but if Portugal is just as broken as Greece regarding sovereign debt, the government debt, if their banks are just as much a mess and broken as the Greek banks, why did Greece receive a whole lot more attention? The answer is simple. Portugal didn't have a giant swath of military contracts. Greece is basically a slush fund for buying French, American, and German weapons. 2/3 of the increased Greek budget spending since Lehman in 2008 was for military hardware. So when they're bailing out the Greek banks, they're bailing out the French, German, and American military contractors. Portugal doesn't have that issue. That factor is really not in the equation. So it's a kind of a simple matter. And we're not talking about a giant center. I don't think Portugal has these giant shipping centers like Greece does. There are a few prized assets in Greece, and I really don't know what a single prized asset in Portugal is. So there was talk back in 2014, because I covered it in the Hat-Trick letter. Banco Espiritu Santo almost went into liquidation. And they didn't want that to happen because they were afraid of a chain reaction that might affect the French banks and the Spanish banks that had exposure to the Portuguese banks. These banks own stock in each other. They own bonds in each other. So if BES went down back in 2014, it was very likely that one of the big French banks might go down. Failure. So Draghi at the Euro Central Bank just made sure that BES and the other troubled Portuguese banks got fixed with funny money, with toilet paper, which satisfied the requirements because by law toilet paper is called money. So I don't have any further information except to tell you that BES and the other Portuguese banks were given slush fund money straight from the Euro Central Bank. They were fixed to prevent a fuse being lit for Western European banking exposure meltdown.
All right. Now, for the last viewer's question, this viewer is wanting to know, we know the NSA collects everyone's data. Could you explain how they could use this information to engage in things such as market manipulation, insider trading, etc.?
Well, I don't think you have seen or going to see NSA using trading information of individuals in order to exploit that advantage. I'd like to change the question a little bit. What activity by the U.S. government security agencies is prevalent, and how does that affect financial markets and the economy? I think, to begin with, let me just complete this. NSA does a lot of things that are very, very dodgy, questionable, like collecting data, and their Utah facility holding all kinds of email and banking and stock trading information. Okay, that's Big Brother to the hilt, to be sure. But I've got a couple of examples of people that I know from stories told to me by Cato, a source. The NSA does some really good things. They protect individuals from unwanted harm and just harm that should not have happened. They help out a lot. They prevent a lot of real mean, nasty types from hacking in to U.S. financial centers like from China and Iran. There are some that come from China and Iran, even Russia. The trouble is, and I'm leading to something new, the trouble is that whatever legitimate threat that is obstructed by the NSA from foreign parties like Iran, Russia, China, whatever legitimate threat happens, multiply it by 10, and that's Langley. I believe 80% of all credit card fraud is done by our own Langley friends who operate as the exceptional nation. Langley is a sovereign nation operating inside the United States. Langley does whatever they want, and then they issue a press story that, no, that big hack-in, that big hacking incident and break-in and data snatch, that was done by the Chinese when it was really Langley that did it. So 80% of credit card bank fraud is done by Langley, blamed on our foreign enemies, which we have a really good track record of creating. I don't think Iran is our enemy. I once went skiing in western Maine at a favorite spot of mine called Sunday River. I probably went skiing there 30 times. A lot of fun. We went there because the New Yorkers didn't go there. We skiers in New England really despise the New Yorkers because they ski drunk and they run over your skis out of control and a lot of different things. I got injured once, my neck, from some drunk guy going full speed ramming into me from New York, and then he cursed me out when I was on the ground. But I bumped into this fellow in western Maine at Sunday River in a bed and breakfast, and he was a bioengineering PhD from Iran. And I didn't have many opportunities like that. So I picked his brain, and we talked for 3 hours. Finally, his arranged wife came down, and they had to go out for dinner. By that I mean he didn't even know his wife. And she showed up in the Boston area. Cambridge is where the company was, a bioengineering company. So he got married to this woman who was arranged by his families. But I had a chance to talk to him about a lot of different things regarding Iran. And he told me some very strange things. He told me that 90% of the people did not like the mullahs and the ruling Muslim elite. They didn't like them. Didn't care for the Ayatollah or any of their priests that they call mullahs. And he was wondering, why didn't the United States come in there and sweep them out and give Iran a chance to become a viable member? And I said, well, I think it's kind of easy. They wanted to make Iran an enemy so that they could be marginalized, pretty much like Russia and China. And he found that to be an alarming point of view. But anyway, back to the point in closing. The security agencies are largely the problem right now. I'm talking about Britain, MI6, Langley, CIA, Israel, and the Mossad. They're coordinating the attacks in Western Europe. I'll give you an example, 2 of them. In Paris, back in September, they had a terrorist attack. I forecasted a month beforehand a Western European major city terrorist attack simply from my just grasp of the facts regarding Arab refugees. The Soros Foundation was paying for their passage. So I reasoned that they were moving in some nasty types who were going to blow things up. And some of the people who died in Paris died in official custody after phoning home saying that they were okay. Okay, so that was pretty squarely true to be a security agency operation in Paris. And one much more clear-cut was the Brussels incident about 2 months ago that the Israeli Mossad had complete control of at the Brussels airport because the Mossad has 100% contract for security at the Brussels airport. So if there was a breach of security in Brussels at their airport, either the Mossad is extremely incompetent or they were totally responsible And I can tell you for a fact, they are not extremely irresponsible. Therefore, they were totally responsible.
Jim, Willie, thank you so much for giving us your time today. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers where they can find you on the internet and subscribe to your newsletter if they're interested in finding out more?
Sure. I just finished the 12th anniversary in April. The website of the newsletter, it's called the Hat Trick Letter, and it's located on the www.goldenjackass.com website. There's a free area for interviews and public articles, and the Hat Trick Letter consists of the Global Money War Report for high-level issues, and the second one is the Gold and Currency Report for ground-level issues, plus more on BRICS and the Eurasian Trade Zone. So I hope people can go to the website, bounce around, become more familiar, and sign up for the Hat Trick newsletter.
Once again, Jim, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for having me.
This video was brought to you in part by ReluctantPreppers.com. Click here to watch Reluctant Prepper's latest interview with Jay Taylor, Falsehoods We Are Fed and Facts We Are Forbidden.